Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our channel. My name is Ali, and today we're going to be diving into the topic the impact of early childhood experiences on mental health. I'm joined by Professor Shiona Robertson. Professor Shiona, welcome and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to come and sit with us. So, how would you define mental health?
I think it's a great question. And I think to start with, considering or thinking about mental health as a spectrum, um, people often use mental health and mental illness interchangeably, and they're not quite the same thing. So I like to think of mental health as a way to summarize and capture our well being, our wellness, that's impacted by various domains of functioning, if you like. For example, our social, our emotional, psychological, physiological, our cognitions. Um, and it's certainly, with it being on that spectrum or a continuum, it moves and changes. Like, so it's never static. It changes in response to numbers of things that we can certainly touch on and talk about today. Whereas mental illness typically refers to something that is a mental health related concept, if you like, but it's something that is diagnosable typically, something that may be short term, long term. There can be numbers of factors of what leads to the development of mental illness presentations. So that's how I would, if you like, summarize mental wellness or mental
Mm,
health, sorry.
mm. And I like how you went ahead to look at it from all perspective, like a holistic approach to
Yeah.
the whole issue of our mental health.
And I think it's an important way to look at it
Mm,
because there can be many factors that contribute to how well we are in our functioning mentally at any given point in our life. And, many people, there's lots of misconceptions about
mm,
mental health,
mm,
in particularly mental illness. I think there's still a lot of stigma out there. There's many different campaigns and different organizations that are on the go of trying to educate the public and end the stigma around mental health, but there still is a lot of stigma.
mm, mm. Can you talk about her how early childhood experiences
Mm-hmm.
really impact or influence our mental health outcomes?
Absolutely. It really is critical,
Mm,
what happens to us in our childhood
mm,
from conception,
mm,
right the way through across development. And we can talk about some critical periods related to that. But our experiences in childhood impact how we develop, how our personality develops, but also how our resilience or vulnerability
mm,
develops, depending on what caregiving experiences we've had, depending on the environments we've grown up in, depending on biological factors as well, and many, many different environmental factors that impact children. And so, how resilient someone becomes is determined by what has happened to them. There's a great book Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey wrote together, What Happened to You? And it talks about the need to move away from looking at people who may be having some mental health challenges and looking at behaviors that we see in children and youth and moving away from that, what is wrong with you, to what happened to you.
mm,
Because what happened to you allows us to understand the context as to why people do what they do or why kids, youth behave the way they behave.
mm, mm. I'm picking up a key
Mm-hmm.
word there, resiliency, and I hear that word a lot. Can you speak a little bit more about resiliency, what it is, and how do we develop that?
Yeah. So resiliency, and I guess in the most simplistic term, is the ability to bounce back. Like I like to think about a rubber band. Like if you stretch it, it snaps back into place. And so resiliency is the ability to bounce back in the face of adversity or difficulty, stress, whatever it may be. There's a misconception that stress is a bad thing. Like if we have stress in our life, it's not a good thing. And actually, the work of Bruce Perry has shown that in order to develop resiliency, we do need to have stress. But what it looks like is important. And so experiencing typical stress that people do as children, youth, stress that is short term, stress that is kind of predictable, that you would expect to experience at different developmental stages, that there's end in sight. Experiencing these little short-lived stressful moments is what can help build resiliency, along with the type of caregiving environment that people are raised in. Biological factors impact as well. But it's all, I like to think of it as all a big melting pot. And so if people can have those kind of experiences, over time, their resilience will increase. As we reach into adolescence and adulthood, stress changes. But again, having some stress in life where we learn, hey, I can cope with that. I got through that. I was okay. I've survived, can help build our resilience, along with how we take care of ourselves. But the flip side can happen where kids have stress that is ongoing, where it is profound or overwhelming, where there is no end in sight. This is what can lead to more vulnerability. And so Dr. Perry has a great phrase where he says children are not truly resilient, they're malleable. As in, we can look at children who have been through really difficult, adverse experiences in their childhood and may look like they're resilient, but when it's really tested, like when they're really tested, that resilience is tested, they're not able to bounce back. They, if anything, they've become malleable and adapted to their environment, if that makes sense.
So resiliency, in order to know how resilient you are, that resiliency that you think you have needs to be tested.
Yeah, and it is for all of us. It is for all of us in different ways. Like we all experience some stressors in life, and sometimes those stressors may be more profound than others. But sometimes those stressors, where they're starting to impact, where people in their limbic brains and lower regions of their brains, where people are not feeling necessarily safe, it can lead to that kind of knock in our resilience, or lead to more vulnerability. So, for example, if you as a child never know when your next meal is going to be, like you don't have sometimes you don't have your basic needs met, it's difficult to learn and build resilience because you're so focused on other things. And also, that isn't a short-term stress, it's a potentially life-threatening or perceived life-threatening piece for the brain.
That makes a lot of sense to me. So my follow-up to that would be, and it's probably a bit cultural, based on your experience, would you say that you've observed that individuals from certain cultures tend to be more resilient than others, or individuals who were born within a certain year, do you find that they have a different?
It's a really interesting question, because I think culture certainly can play a factor into how people develop and just what experiences they have and how those experiences impact them. I think an important piece for us always to remember is the meaning a child or a youth makes of their experiences, and whether it's something that has impacted them in a really difficult, negative, or challenging way will depend on that child or youth. And so understanding their perspective is really important rather than making our own assumptions about that. That being said, you know, if a child is growing up, for example, in a war-torn country or community where there's a lot of instability, and maybe there's economic instability, there's maybe food poverty, there may be housing instability, along with they're living in a community where their life is in danger. It is very difficult in those kind of circumstances to not be impacted in some way. And it's like, again, it's understanding what that impact is and what that meant to that kid. That being said, there's many examples of people who have grown up under certain conditions that could have impacted them negatively. However, because of other protective factors in their lives, they've come out resilient. And I think about in the trauma class I teach, where we talk about Malala, who, you know, growing up in under Taliban regime, spoke out consistently. Her father was a huge advocate and educated his daughter, even though that wasn't the practice. Malala, targeted by the Taliban, you know, shot on a school bus ride at point blank range in the head. She survived. And here we see like this, the real resilience of her, that even after surviving, after having to have surgeries, after facing that real threat to her life, she continued to be a strong advocate, to speak out about the importance of education of girls, and went on to win a Nobel Peace Prize. So I think it's really important that we don't necessarily label folks.
And I'm thinking too, what role then does early childhood, that early years of attachment that children form with parents or caregivers, what role, if any, does that play, that attachment?
It's huge. I mean, I very much am a big advocate for understanding attachment and the impact it has on development. I also think it's important for us to recognize, though, that a lot of attachment theory is heavily Western European based. And so we have to be careful, like when we're just applying or thinking about these theories and applying it to people, because it doesn't always culturally translate. And so there is a need to just to think about that. And certainly for professionals working with children and youth, that's an important piece. That being said, though, we know that a secure caregiving environment, whatever that looks like, it doesn't have to look like the typical Western European two-parent model. It could be the village or the community of people, the wider family, whatever that looks like. But what we know kids need is predictable, nurturing, consistent caregiving, routines, all those things. Kids need rules, they need structure to help them feel safe. And when kids have their needs met in a predictable and consistent way, this is what then leads to the building of resilience. This is what leads to providing a strong foundation for kids in terms of their brain development, in terms of then how their self-regulation system kind of works, in terms of their ability to be a child, go to school, learn, all these things that we want for children. Just start with those early child caregiver relationships. And so I think we can't underestimate that enough. And in fact, there's been studies, there's the ACE studies, the Adverse Childhood Experience studies, that were done by Kaiser Permanente down in the US. They looked at, could you tell, essentially by the number of adverse childhood experiences a person has, what the outcomes are for later life in terms of health outcomes. So looking at physical health, mental health, how somebody socially functions, and they determined yes, you can, and they were able to correlate folks that had higher numbers of adverse childhood experiences. And on their original listing, I believe there was about 10, but people with higher numbers were at greater risk for things like cancers, heart disease, asthma, obesity. There was numbers of different contributing factors at greater risk for developing a substance use habit with alcohol or other substances. We're at greater risk of being diagnosed with a mental health illness or conditions such as anxiety, depression. They found people with higher ACE scores were more likely to find it difficult to maintain employment. I mean, they found this across the whole spectrum of functioning. So it just, when we think about this and what we know, it just says all the more importance of thinking about what we do for kids, particularly in those early years.
Is there then a specific period of time in a child's development when those experiences are more impactful?
Yeah, there's sometimes confusion. People sometimes think that the younger a child is, the less they'll be impacted because they're not aware of whatever they're experiencing. However, I would kind of say it's the opposite. So from conception, we have the potential for babies, the developing fetus, to be impacted. So we know things like if the mother consumes alcohol during pregnancy, that can lead to changes in that baby's brain, developing brain. That child is at risk for developing fetal alcohol syndrome, which is a whole other piece. We know that the womb environment is important, not just from what the mother's consuming, but if the mother is under severe extreme stress in her pregnancy, that can also impact the developing fetus's brain. And then once the baby's born, we often talk about in attachment birth to 5-6 years. Birth to 3 is a particularly important piece in terms of brain development. Just as different structures of the brain are maturing and kind of organizing in that time frame. And so it's why caregiving is so important, because that caregiving relationship, baby offers up a cue, cries, whatever, parent, caregiver, whoever it is, responds to cue, addresses baby's needs, settles, soothes baby. This back and forth reciprocal care relationship is what leads to the development of resilience. It's what leads to the development of security. It's what leads to all the good things we want and helps that baby's brain mature and stabilize. And when I talk about that baby's brain, I'm talking about the lower regions of the brain, not our wrinkly cortex that we all think about. I'm talking about our brain stem, our midbrain, our limbic brain, which is a whole other huge conversation
that we could have.
Absolutely.
And we certainly will. So we would end here for now. We're going to be having a number of parts that we're adding to this. This is part 1. Professor, you have a wealth of information. I'm sitting here listening to you, and I'm thinking we could have you, and we must have you on here if you'll allow us.
Oh, absolutely.
Over and over and over again, because you have a wealth of knowledge to share with us and to share with the viewers and all who may come across our channel. So thank you for being here and availing yourself to answering all of these questions. And we look forward to having more conversations with you and follow-ups to what we have started discussing today.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would like to say
No,
in
thank you for
closing?
having me. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. Yeah,
Yeah,
excited
I
to
could
join
see
you
that.
again.
I could see that. Thank you so much.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you.
So, guys, thank you again for being here on our channel. We are happy that you've joined. Please look for the part two, the three, the four, the five, and the six. Please also like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and we will see you next time. Thank you.